Hey guys, on the screen I have a BCG slide deck. This is a real BCG slide deck they made for the Victorian government in Australia. And this is a great example of what a strategy deck looks like. And I recommend that you have a read through it. I'll link it in the description below. The most useful part of this deck is actually the executive summary because it's a great example of how to do an executive summary well. And here's the two executive summary slides. In this video, we're going to break down this BCG executive summary, and I'm going to pull out 3 principles that you can use and apply in your own executive summaries. Let's jump into it. So I've pulled out the executive summary slides into this slide deck. Before we start, I just recommend you spend a bit of time reading through the BCG executive summary so you understand what I'm talking about as I go through these 3 principles. All right, let's jump into the first principle. So I think one of the first things you will have noticed about the BCG executive summary is that the way that they've structured the text. You can see they have a bold sentence, and underneath it they have a few bullet points. Now there's a real reason for this, and the reason is that the bold sentences summarize your argument. The bullet points underneath are supporting data. So I've put out an example here. So we have an example which says, there are some weaknesses that Melbourne needs to address in their cultural and creative offer. Now, that's a claim that BCG is making. Now, underneath, they've got supporting evidence because someone might say, I disagree with that claim, or tell me why that claim is correct. And one example of a supporting data point is 90% of arts agencies and thought leaders believe Melbourne's cultural offer is not clearly articulated. So that's an example of a supporting data point. Now, BCG uses this approach throughout the entire executive summary, claim and then supporting data underneath. And that's important because your slide deck needs to be evidence-based and data-driven. So that's the first principle. Bold for summary sentences, bullets for supporting data. Now, the second principle is how the summary sentences read. And you may not have noticed this, but they actually read like a narrative. So I've just gone and pulled out all of those bold sentences from this executive summary, and I've put them together on this slide. It might be surprising, but as you read this text, you'll realize this reads really, really well. It's almost like it was written together, and it's basically a narrative. And that's an important part of the executive summary as well, because each of the bold sentences articulate one part of their argument or logical thread. And when you put those things together, they should make sense. It should read like a fairly coherent argument. And you'll see that here. So the second principle of executive summaries is your bold summary sentences should read together just like a narrative or an argument. And finally, the third principle is about how that argument or narrative is structured. And you'll see that BCG actually uses a structure known as the SCR structure, which is situation, complication, resolution. Now, that's a kind of universal narrative structure that you'll see in novels, films, theatre, and a whole bunch of other places. And the reason is because it's a natural way to think about a story. Us as humans, this is how we understand stories. So that's how BCG's written their executive summary. They start with a situation which sets the scene for their argument. It brings everyone along and ensures that they have all the context they need to understand why what we're about to talk about is important. The second part, the complication, articulates what the problem is, how serious it is, and why we need to respond to it. So that's the second part, complication. And then resolution articulates very clearly, very actionably, what are the next steps or recommendations to solve the problem that we've just articulated. Some people talk about an SCQA structure. I find that explicitly articulating the question is not really necessary. And SCR is basically the same as SCQA, follows the exact same structure. And if you read the body of the slide deck, all the other slides, you'll see that they also follow a situation, complication, resolution structure. So that's it, 3 principles for your executive summaries. If you found that useful, jump onto slidescience.co where we have a full write-up of how to write executive summaries, but also other tips and tricks for strategy consulting slide decks. Things like the pyramid principle, the MECE principle, and much more. And if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the comment box down below. Hope that was useful.